look at how we behave.
Are you saying there are no philosophical problems?
There are linguistic, mathematical, ethical, logistic, and religious problems, but there are no genuine philosophical problems.
You're trivializing philosophy.
Philosophy is just a byproduct of misunderstanding language. Why don't you realize that?
Oh dear. Can't bear disagreement, can you?
By the way, that probably was a confusing sketch because it introduced about 5 or 6 different specific problems, like the problem of a private language. Language only works if there's more than one speaker that understands it. Because I can't say something and know if I said it correctly unless I see your response to it. In other words, and we're constantly correcting one another's interpretations of what we're saying. So when you're like in a court and you say, I didn't intend for such and such, well, it's not up to you to judge whether or not you intended or not. It's the jury that will decide whether you intended it or not. But also in so private language, private pain, you can't have private pain, essentially. I can express my pain. The idea that what we're thinking, and I'm pretty sure we grow up thinking this, that what I'm thinking and then I try to express it. I try to think of the words that I want to use to express it. What Wittgenstein argues is that the thought itself in the language is the thought that you're having. There's nothing hidden in our mind. Everything that you are thinking, you can express. In other words, the language enables our thoughts. There's not stuff behind the thoughts, and we try to figure out the right thought. I suppose what we're trying to do in that kind of a situation is trying to think what we want to say, and so there's clearly a matter of framing how you're saying something, but it's not a matter of there being something mysterious behind what we're saying in our language. It does, of course, get more complex when we start thinking about how many languages there are. And all class, I think, I've been talking about the role that models play and the role that different languages play, and how some languages don't seem to have the ability to do other things that other languages do, and so on. So there's all kinds of issues associated with that as well. Now, moving on from there, I think I've mentioned Willard Van Orman Quine, who was a professor at Harvard. Before that, he was a student in Ohio. I forget the name of the university that he went to. I'm sure it's in here. But in any case, he eventually ended up in Harvard. Alfred North Whitehead was one of his professors. Remember, Alfred North Whitehead was also one of Russell's professors and became a colleague of Russell. When they wrote Mathematica, Principia Mathematica, the co-author was Alfred North Whitehead, Sir Alfred North Whitehead. And he's an interesting philosopher in his own. I also proud of the fact that I got to meet Willard Van Orman Quine myself in my alma mater. He came and gave a lecture there. And it was fascinating because, I might have already mentioned it, but his basic thesis in that lecture was that mathematical logicians, which is what he was, their main job is to give scientists adequate language to express what they're discovering, because the problem that scientists are having is that they don't have subjects anymore in their sentences. They just have predicates. Did I explain this before? No? Well, so we end up with a predicate language. And a predicate language is where in the code that you're writing using the language that Bertrand Russell first initiated, the focus is on the sets of things that perform a certain way. And the number of, so you refer to the item, first you have to have a quantifier, so we have two quantifiers. Remember, in the four types of statements that we get from Aristotle, we have all of the subject or predicate, none of the subject or predicate. Both of those are universal, so you use a universal quantifier, where you say for anything you pick, if it is human, then it is mortal. So the predicate is the capital letter. So for anything you pick, if that thing is human, then, because this is if then, that thing is mortal, right? So you're using a quantifier, and if I were to say a negative, so that nothing that's human is mortal, right? Then I would do it this way. Put a negation here. That's meant to like a little negation sign there. So for anything you pick, if it's human, then it's not the case that that is mortal. So this is your universal quantifier. The other quantifier you would have is backward E in front of the X. You actually have different variations of this. You might have an upside down V. It depends on really what changed the symbols that they used were the fonts that were available, depending on the system you were using to write it. So computer fonts had a big thing to do with what you end up with. But so you can have for anything it's actually, there exists an X, so at least one thing, such that it is human, this is terrible, and mortal. It's terrible too. Oh well. And so you have two quantifiers. And the interesting thing about their relationship, this would give you the two statements that some subject is predicate and some subject is not predicate, right? That might be confusing the way I did that because I'm using subject as a predicate in both of those cases because I used it as a capital S or capital P. Sorry about that. But in any case, with Quine, objects that scientists are dealing with are quarks, which are going in and out of existence. So they don't actually exist as a subject that persists over time. Instead, what does persist over time is the arrangement of things. And so what you're talking about is actually the relationship between arrangements. Complex systems in an arrangement are what we're looking at today. That's not only true with Quine, by the way, that's also true with Bruno Latour. I mentioned him, and he talks about sets of things. It's also true of a French philosopher that I haven't mentioned, I don't think, Alain Badiou. Who is still alive, 86 years old. Being an Event is one of his main books. I don't know if you see where I'm at here. Being an Event. And he refers to those arrangements as events. It's also fun that because Hegel wrote about being and non-being, And then Heidegger wrote Sein und Zeit, time and being, or being and time, depending on how you translate it. Sein is being and Zeit is time, so being and time. And then Sartre wrote against Heidegger, criticizing his work, and his book is Being and Nothingness, which is fun. I mentioned Thomas, can't think of his name right now, but his book was Being No One. And then you get Slavoj Žižek, whose book is Less Than Nothing. It's just fun. They're all, and these are all huge tomes and so on. But the idea of event for Badiou is that he's talking about that arrangement of sets. If you look at Peter Sloterdijk, he talks about bubbles. And the translation, they refer to his as bubbles. Various sizes and shapes of bubbles. Rage and Time, that's his book on that, on that same theme. Rage and Time starts off talking about Achilles at the beginning of the Iliad, because unless you read the Greek, rage is the first word of the Iliad. And he's in a rage because Agamemnon has taken his prize. So that's, that was Briseis of the fair cheeks, etc. So that's I don't know if you're interested. Some of those, by the way, I have on my my list of philosophers, if you're still working on who to do. Quine, let me get back to Quine. His most famous work, Quine, was Two Dogmas of Empiricism. And one of the dogmas that we've had ever since Aristotle is that there are two types of knowledge. There's universal type of knowledge that you would describe with universal type statements. Those are also what we refer to as the definitions of things. A universal, all horses are animals, right? Then we also have synthetic information. Remember the difference between Kant and analyzing the problem that Hume set, and you have analytic is universal, right? And synthetic is specific information about a specific item, right? They both frame their problem that way. With Quine, in Two Dogmas of Empiricism, you end up discovering that we can have what is referred to in logic as a quantifier exchange rule. A quantifier exchange rule. So, for example, if I do it this way. No, that won't work. Let me try one of these. I have more magic markers available. One of them should work. This is the kind of thing where if I don't write it down, I might not get through it myself. So, for anything you pick, this is the case. That turns out to be equivalent 2, it's not the case that there is something that is not that. So for anything you pick, everything is an animal. It's false, by the way, but nonetheless, just take this as a statement. For anything you pick, everything is an animal. All things are animals, however you want to say it.